Welcome to Ideas in Action, a television series about ideas and their consequences. I'm Jim Glassman. This week, insurrection in Egypt, Tunisia, Yemen, and throughout the Middle East. The uprisings come as Iran celebrates the 32nd anniversary of the Islamic Revolution that brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power. And while memories of the 2009 crackdown against the Green Movement are still fresh. What's behind these mass movements in the Middle East? And will they inspire the Green Movement to rise once again? Joining me to explore this topic are Mohsen Sazagara, Iranian journalist and visiting fellow at the George W. Bush Institute at Southern Methodist University. He was a leader in Iran's revolution of 1979 and is now an activist in its pro-democracy movement. Joshua Moravchik, a fellow at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies and a prolific author on foreign affairs, including his latest book, The Next Founders: Voices of Democracy in the Middle East. The topic this week, uprisings in the Arab world, implications for Iran and the United States. This is Ideas in Action.
Funding for Ideas in Action is provided by Investors Business Daily. Every stock market cycle is led by America's never-ending stream of innovative new companies and inventions. Investors Business Daily helps investors find these new leaders as they emerge. More information is available at investors.com.
Mohsen, what is the main driver behind these mass movements and uprisings we're seeing now in the Middle East?
I think it's democracy, demand for freedom, free election. And now is the time that the fork way that dictators like Hosni Mubarak has tried to draw for several years. They have said that there is only two ways in Middle East: military dictators, Islamism, and Islamists at the power. Now there is a third way.
Of course, in Iran, 32 years ago, you were there, and you had a broad coalition that was in opposition to a dictatorship. And what emerged was not a democracy.
You know, 32 years ago, we had a military dictator. He was the Shah of Iran. He came to power by a military coup in 1953. But the situation was quite different. All groups were united against Shah, but the main part of the movement against Shah were Islamists, so they took the power. But last year in Iran, in the Green Movement of Iran, the middle class of Iran, many of the intellectuals, elites of the society, they united against Islamists in Iran and asked for free election, freedom of election, and democracy. So I think that that movement in Iran has inspired many of the Islamic nations in the whole region.
So what happened in the in 2009 is inspiring Arab countries?
I think so.
Okay. Josh, what do you see as the kind of core of these uprisings that have gone on in Arab countries?
The Arab world, the Muslim Middle East, has been an outlier. If you take away the Muslim Middle East, more than 70% of the governments in the world today have been elected by their own people in legitimate, contested, free and fair elections. And if you look at the Muslim Middle East, the number that have been elected by their own people is essentially zero, except maybe Iraq, with the U.S. military presence. So this part of the world has just been left behind, but the world is very interpenetrated these days, particularly the younger generation with the electronic media. They see what's going on everywhere else. And there's been a lot of talk about why not us too? Why can't we choose our own government?
So, Josh, so it's almost as though the solidarity movement in Poland is at the root of what's happening in Egypt?
Well, I wouldn't go that far because I think these things are very inflammable and they tend to spread, but usually within regions. So if you think back to solidarity, when it rose the second time in 1988, by the end of 1989, every communist government in Eastern Europe had been overthrown. If you think back to Latin America, in the 70s, there was a military dictatorship in almost every country, and over the course of a series of years, they were all, except for Castro's Cuba, they were all overthrown. And you could go all the way back to 1848. In 1 year, there were, when people in Europe were first fighting for democracy, there were 50 revolutions in 1 year. I think that a spark has been ignited in the Middle East, first in Iran. It took a while, but when the Iranian demonstrations were going on in 2009, if you went to the internet and to Facebook and so on, again and again there were Egyptian young people saying, why are we so lame? How can the Iranians get out in the street and fight their dictator and we can't fight ours?
And this is a connection that I don't think has been made very much since Tunisia and Iran. I'm sorry, since Tunisia and Egypt. This connection between Iran and Arab countries. Is Iran being affected? Is the Green Movement, of which you are an integral part, is that being affected by what's happened in Egypt?
Definitely yes, and these days I have several emails from the young generation in Iran with big questions. They say that before Egypt, they are asking about Tunisia, because they say that Tunisia succeeded, why shouldn't we? And as Josh said, a young person in Iran thinks like an Egyptian young generation. Because of the new tools, internet, satellite TVs, many of them are good friends of themselves on Facebooks.
But they don't speak the same language.
They use English. I have seen several of them that they use English, especially diaspora, the part of the movements who are outside the country. They have very close ties to each other, and they try to learn from each other.
I want to go back to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, because that was the biggest revolution in the Middle East, the biggest popular uprising in the Middle East in our times. Do you think that what's going on in these Arab countries is more related to 79, or is it more related to 09, as far as Iran is concerned?
Oh, I think decisively more to 09. There's been a big question mark hanging over Egypt through all political discourse for many years, which is, if the current regime were to fall, will the Muslim Brothers take over? Is the alternative to Mubarak an Islamist Egypt?
And the Muslim Brotherhood is, you just tell our viewers.
Well, they're sort of the original Islamist group founded in the 1920s, and their slogan is, Islam is the answer. That is, the answer to what? Well, presumably to all political problems. And in a sense, although there are different movements and the differences between Sunni and Shia, but the Muslim Brothers were really the originators of this idea of Islamic politics that were to a large extent borrowed by the Iranians. And people who followed Egypt have wondered about what is the real strength of the Muslim Brothers. No one knew, because it's all subterranean, because there's been a dictatorship and there's been no free votes, there's no reliable public opinion polls. And I think what we've seen just watching the demonstrations, the anti-Mubarak demonstrations, is that the Muslim Brothers have been there, but they've been a very decided minority. And they've been far outnumbered by people who are talking in clear terms, you know, not about an Islamic Egypt, Islamist Egypt, but about democracy and freedom. And that's why I think the answer to your question is the Egyptians who are in the streets now are looking at Iran of 2009. They're not looking at Iran of 1979.
Josh is right. You know, we learned from Muslim Brotherhood.
You meaning?
I mean, my generation in Islamic Revolution. But what happened during last 32 years? We implemented those ideas in Iran. It didn't work. And now go back to that mutual, you know, interrelations between these nations. Now, if you look at the even Muslim activists in Islamic countries, even them, I mean, Rashid al-Ghanouchi in Tunisia or Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, they very simple. They say that, oh, we don't want to make another Islamic revolution. We don't want to make another Islamic republic.
So even they are saying that, and it's because you're saying a big factor is the experience in Iran.
Exactly.
That has not been particularly inspirational. It may have been inspirational, the overthrow of the Shah, but what's happened since has not made anyone particularly excited about having that kind of regime.
I think that not only the experience of those ideas in Iran failed, but again, I go back to 2009. I go back to last year. Everybody in Islamic countries saw that an Islamic regime is how brutal, how attacks to girls, young girls, boys on the streets, and especially amongst the you know, Arab satellite TVs, they had very good coverage about the events in Iran. And this is the very simple reason that now even the Muslim activists, they say, at the first step, they say, no, we are not another Khomeini, we are not another Islamic revolution, and we are just fighting for freedom. I think that I have read some articles from the present Muslim Brotherhood. They have been changed as well. They have changed some of their ideas.
And is another change, Josh, the attractiveness of democracy? Could we even say that some of the people in Arab countries are looking at the newest Arab democracy, which is Iraq?
I haven't seen signs of that, Jim. I was a supporter of the American invasion of Iraq. I hoped that we could turn Iraq into a democracy and that it would be a model for the region. But I'd be very slow to say that succeeded. It may be that Iraq is increasingly becoming a democracy, but the terrible, hellish years that Iraq went through of endless violence in the street, I think had a negative effect. I think in the region, a lot of people looked at the chaos in Iraq and said, if that's democracy, I don't want that in my country. So I don't think we can take Iraq as much of a model for what's going on in these other countries.
Iraq is not a good example. It didn't happen by the hands of the people. There is nothing in Iraq to be learned by the other nations. That was, you know, U.S. and British troops invading Iraq, and so, and what happened after that was terrible. But the general policy of the United States, you know, that was a turn point, I think. I remember that on those days I was in Iran and in two different universities. In my speeches, I said that this is for the first time. We have the image of the United States as a government which supports the dictators from 70s in Latin America or in Middle East. supporting Shah, supporting Mubarak, supporting. But for the first time, a president of the United States says, and Condoleezza Rice was on those days the advisor of national security, they are insisting for new Middle East, new democracy for all countries. And this is it. I said that I don't know what's the national benefit of the United States for such a policy, but our national interest, which is democracy, is not in the same way with the United States. So we can push the dictators in the region.
And how important is this ideological point that Mohsen is making, that the United States, by promoting democracy, can have a real impact on countries in the Middle East where you got people who are yearning for democracy? I mean, can we really have an impact?
Oh, I think the United States always has an impact. The fact is, there are a lot of people in the world who resent the United States, who blame the United States for a lot of their problems. But the United States is an enormous force in the world. It's the most powerful country. It's the wealthiest country, and the American ideas are the ideas we're talking about. That is, democracy was thought of by a lot of different people, but it was tried first in America, and this is where it was proved that it could work, that you could have a successful, internally peaceful country governed in this way by the people voting. And even people who are angry at us around the world, in Egypt or other situations, you often see them in the streets saying, why doesn't the United States support us more? So obviously they care a lot about, and I think, if I can echo one point of Mohsen's, I think that the United States had a mixed record. We had pushed democracy in Eastern Europe. In some periods we pushed it in Latin America, but never in the Middle East. There seemed to be a consensus that Middle East had to be ruled by emirs or other kinds of dictators. Right. And Bush, whatever else he may have done right or wrong, he really made a dramatic break and said, no, that's wrong. Our interests aren't with these dictators. We want democracy in these countries too. And remember, he singled out Egypt in I think it was the State of the Union address. He said, call upon the great country of Egypt, which led the Middle East in peace, now to lead it in democracy. And I think to have an American president talking that way left a certain lasting impact in the way people were thinking about the possibility of democracy in their own country and region.
I want to come back to the Iranian Revolution. So why did the Islamists prevail?
One of the most important reasons was the network of the clergy, and the mosques all around the country who supported the revolution. You know, dictatorship of the Shah destroyed any political party, any opposition group, except the mosques and religious organizations.
But in our comparison now between Iran and Egypt, isn't that true today? I mean, certainly Mubarak did his best to destroy or minimize the effect of civil society. Mm-hmm. You had the Muslim Brotherhood, but really not much in the way of other institutions. I have to say that, when I was at the State Department, we tried to help build some of these institutions, but I don't think we got very far.
But there is a very, very big difference between Iran and Egypt. Sunni countries, the network of the mosques are controlled by the governments. But in Shiism, the mosques are independent of the government. So, I mean, in Iran, because of Shiism, the network of the mosques were independent from the government. And that as soon as Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader, succeeded to persuade the majority of the clerics of Iran to support him and the Islamic Revolution, then we had a very powerful tool against Shah.
Can I ask you a personal question? Why did you change sides?
Oh, it started about 3 years after victory of the revolution. Gradually, I found out that the system doesn't work. When I saw the brutality of the, ideological regime against the opposition groups and the inefficiency in the industries of Iran and the slogans against all the world, including the United States and several other factors, gradually I changed my ideas. I reread all the books of the founders of revolution, and at last, not only me, many people like me in my generation, we changed our ideas from a maximal theory of religion to a minimum theory of religion, and to think about a democratic version of Islam instead of a revolutionary ideologic version of Islam, a kind of pluralism in religion, pluralistic religion instead of a monoistic religion.
And you think that that is that kind of view is shared by many people in the Middle East?
By many people, yeah, in my generation. The first step that came out of these types of idea in Iran was reform movement in Iran on 90s. We tried to reform the regime toward the democracy. It didn't work because of the constitution. So the next step was to change the constitution. And what happened last year in 2009 in Iran, to use the situation of presidential election in Iran, was a big step toward a democratic movement in Iran.
So, Josh, given what you said earlier about kind of a democratic contagion regionally in Latin America and Eastern Europe, do you think that the Green Movement will prevail in Iran?
I'm very confident that the Green Movement will prevail in Iran. Iran is the most ripe for democracy of the countries of the region. Even though they've lived under this terrible theocracy, and before that, the Shah's dictatorship, but they have had voting, they have had some parties organized, they have had opposition newspapers. Mohsen was the one who published some of them. And so the people there in Iran have some experience with the forms of democracy, even though they haven't had the privilege to live under it. And I think it would be easy to make that transition in Iran, and I think the people will keep demanding it.
Josh, in your book, The Next Founders, where you profile leaders in the Middle East who are fighting for democracy, including Mohsen, you say this: a critical requisite of democracy is Democrats, small d, people who believe in democracy and are ready to work and fight for it. Can U.S. policy increase the number of Democrats in the Middle East, and how?
Two things I would focus on. One is just the rhetoric from the top about the necessity for democracy.
And has there been enough of that?
Well, what's heartbreaking is that President Obama has been, from the day he took office, so determined to erase the legacy of President Bush that he's completely turned away from Bush's innovation of advocating democracy for the Middle East. I'm hoping that the events in Egypt will give him second thoughts. He has a more silvered tongue than President Bush had. If we could hear this kind of advocacy of democracy from President Obama, it might even reach further. And the second thing is, it's a young generation that's leading the push for change, and it's also this young generation that's going to have to assume leadership of these countries. When the change comes, they're going to need all new institutions to create a democracy. It's easy to overthrow, not easy, but relatively easy to overthrow a dictator. It's much harder to build a democracy that lasts for through elections and through political conflicts. And and people need training, they need education. We did some very fine stuff after 1989 with young people from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, often bringing them here for a period of time, or programs that we ran over there to help give them more skills so that they could take over the leadership of a kind of new democratic country. And I think we need to do the same thing in the Middle East.
Thank you, Josh Maravi.
Pleasure.
And thank you, Mohsen Sazagara. And that's it for this week's Ideas in Action. I'm Jim Glassman. Thanks for watching. Keep in mind that you can watch Ideas in Action whenever and wherever you want. To watch highlights or complete programs, just go to ideasinactiontv.com or download a podcast from the iTunes Store. Ideas in Action, because ideas have consequences.
For more information, visit us at ideasinactiontv.com. Funding for Ideas in Action is provided by Investors Business Daily. Every stock market cycle is led by America's never-ending stream of innovative new companies and inventions. Investors Business Daily helps investors find these new leaders as they emerge. More information is available at investors.com. This program is a production of Grace Creek Media and the George W. Bush Institute, which are solely responsible for its content.